This seems to be a year full of divisive comic book movies. From Batman vs. Superman to Civil War, fan and critic opinion has been split down the middle, and X-Men Apocalypse seems to be following this trend. Some people are calling it the worst X-Men movie yet, and others are saying, do you really not remember X-Men Origins Wolverine or The Last Stand? As for me, I thought the movie had some issues, but personally I liked it a lot. So without going into spoilers, let me tell you about some of my issues with the movie and why the things that I like totally redeemed it for me. Firstly, there were some scenes where the CGI was noticeably rough. Now, having the CGI be noticeable at all is a problem in and of itself, so I was disappointed when some of the visuals of this movie weren't up to par. Now, having said that, some of the visuals were actually really spectacular. The entirety of the Quicksilver scene, for example, was as entertaining as it was technically well made, and most, if not all, of the non-CG shots were beautiful or elegantly precise. Some of the pacing in this movie is a bit awkward. They had so much time dedicated to the setup, which is required for a movie of this scale, that they didn't leave enough for the climactic final fight, which made the movie feel a bit lopsided. However, the only scenes I would even want to remove from this setup were the parts involving Moira. All of the other scenes served a specific purpose and added to the overall growth of the plot. One of the biggest issues this movie had is that it tried to do too much in the short amount of time that it had. There were so many new characters to introduce that most of them didn't get a proper base of characterization, let alone adequate room for growth to really make them feel real. Now, at the same time, all of the characters that were previously established were still solid, and their connections to each other still felt genuine. And along this same vein, I thought that all of the new actors were generally speaking pretty good. But when you put them next to the amazing and emotional performances by Michael Fassbender and James McAvoy, the new guys tend to pale in comparison. At the core of the X-Men franchise has always been one relationship, that between Professor X and Magneto. As the director Bryan Singer said, First Class is a story of how Eric Lehnsherr becomes Magneto. Days of Future Past was Charles Xavier becoming Professor X, and that Apocalypse would be the story of Charles and Eric. And that's why I really enjoyed this movie despite the issues that it had. X-Men Apocalypse stayed true to its core and highlighted the importance of the bond shared by Charles and Eric. It doesn't matter how many years it's been or how different the paths they chose were. When these two reconnect, it all falls away. Charles doesn't care where Eric's been or about all the horrible things he's done. He will always forgive Eric, insist that there's still good in him, and ask him if he wants to stay. It doesn't matter if Charles is an optimistic idealist that sees hope where Eric believes there will only ever be pain and suffering. Eric will always defend Charles and smile at him when he calls him his friend. The seclusion of the mutants only serves to emphasize the strength of the bond shared by two characters who are well developed in their own right and only serve as complements to each other when paired together. Even with their radically different ideologies, these two are mutants, friends, and family first, and everything else is secondary. This movie pivoted on my favorite relationship in comics and maybe even all of fiction. So I can honestly say that both times I walked out of the theater, I was happy with the story I had just been told, and ultimately, that's all I can ask for.